Imagine growing up in poverty, struggling to make ends meet, and being told you'll never amount to anything. Now picture yourself failing again and again, losing everything you worked for. Would you keep going? One man did, and he changed history forever. That man was Abraham Lincoln. His life was defined by struggle, poverty, rejection, public humiliation, but instead of surrendering, he found solutions where others saw roadblocks. He didn't just survive hardship, he turned it into his greatest weapon. This is the story of how Lincoln endured, adapted, and reshaped history, and how his problem-solving strategies might help you today. Ever feel like giving up? Lincoln failed more than most, but what happened next might surprise you. Abraham Lincoln was born in a small log cabin in Kentucky in 1809. His family was poor and life was harsh. At just 9 years old, he lost his mother to milk sickness, a painful disease caused by contaminated milk. There were no doctors, no medicine, just a slow, helpless death. His father, a tough and distant man, saw no use for grief or education. Lincoln was expected to work, not read, but he refused to accept that fate. Instead of letting sorrow consume him, he turned to books. They became his escape and his greatest weapon. Without schools nearby, he taught himself to read and write, walking miles just to borrow a book. His love for learning was seen as odd. Other boys worked on the farm. He spent hours under candlelight memorizing Shakespeare, the Bible, and legal texts. His father mocked him for it, but Lincoln didn't care. When he had no paper, he wrote notes on wood planks with charcoal. When he couldn't afford school, he borrowed books and studied alone. He didn't just read, he absorbed, analyzed, and applied. But books alone weren't enough. He had no money, no connections, nothing that could give him an advantage. How does a poor, uneducated farm boy become a leader? The answer: relentless self-improvement. At 23, Lincoln ran for the Illinois state legislature. He lost. At 24, he started a business. It failed. At 26, he ran again, lost. At 29, another election, another defeat. At 31, his fiancée died. At 34, a nervous breakdown. At 45, defeated in a Senate race. Would you have stopped? Most would. But failure was Lincoln's teacher. Each loss forced him to adapt, refine, and improve. Failure is a stepping stone, not a stop sign. But his ambitions didn't stop at politics. He wanted to understand the law, but there was a problem. Unlike most lawyers of his time, Lincoln had no access to formal education. No classroom, no professors, no legal mentors. But if he had learned one thing in life, it was how to teach himself. He borrowed books on law, most notably Blackstone's Commentaries on the Laws of England, the definitive legal text of the time. He read every case he could find, studied legal arguments, and memorized key principles. But books alone wouldn't make him a lawyer. He needed experience. He traveled to county courthouses, watching experienced attorneys argue cases, analyzing their techniques. He practiced writing legal documents, refining his ability to be clear and persuasive. He debated legal principles with anyone who would listen. Lincoln didn't just study law, he lived it. After years of relentless self-study, he applied to take the Illinois bar exam in 1836 and passed. He was officially a lawyer. His success in law wasn't immediate. He had no wealthy clients, no prestigious connections. But his honesty, sharp reasoning, and ability to break down complex issues into simple terms won people over. And soon, the small-town lawyer would become something far greater. Then came his moment. In 1858, Lincoln faced off against Stephen Douglas in a series of legendary debates. The topic: slavery. Douglas was a seasoned politician, smooth and confident. Lincoln, a self-taught lawyer with no polished speeches, but what he lacked in training he made up for in logic, passion, and storytelling. When Douglas argued that states should decide for themselves, Lincoln delivered his now famous words, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." The debate transformed Lincoln from a nobody into a national figure. 2 years later, he ran for President of the United States, and this time he won. But his greatest battle was yet to come. When Lincoln took office in 1861, the country was falling apart. The Civil War had begun. Lincoln, the man who had once been mocked, now held the fate of an entire nation in his hands. But was he ready? At first, he struggled. His generals were hesitant and the war dragged on. Critics called him weak. Newspapers mocked him. But instead of retreating, Lincoln studied war strategy, replaced weak commanders, and took direct control of decisions. His leadership evolved, and then he made his most controversial decision. In 1862, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring enslaved people in Confederate states free. It was a massive gamble. Would it unite the North or push more states to secede? Would it strengthen the Union Army or weaken Lincoln's fragile presidency? The risk paid off. Thousands of freedmen joined the fight. The war shifted. By 1865, the Confederacy surrendered. The country was saved. But Lincoln wouldn't live to see the peace he fought for. Lincoln's story proves that perseverance changes everything. On April 14, 1865, just days after the war ended, Lincoln was assassinated at Ford's Theater. But his journey wasn't just about politics, it was about resilience. He failed more than most. He was mocked, doubted, and dismissed. He lost battles again and again, but he never stopped moving forward. Lincoln didn't succeed because he was lucky. He succeeded because he refused to quit. If Lincoln's story inspired you, drop a comment below. What's one lesson from his journey that resonates with you? And if you love learning from history, subscribe to the Solution Archives, because the past is full of solutions waiting to be uncovered.